Morning.
Morning, Chief.
People ask me if there's an opiate crisis in Georgia. What do we seize?
We got a little bit of heroin, got some oxycodone, fentanyl, and hydrocodone. These are all the items we seized last night.
There'll be more of the same today. There'll be more of the same tomorrow. Law enforcement has to do whatever we can to stop this crisis. Otherwise, people will die.
From June 2016 to May 2017, the total number of opioid doses prescribed to Georgia patients surpassed 541 million. To put that number in perspective, that's approximately 54 doses for every man, woman, and child in Georgia. And today, 62% of drug overdose deaths in Georgia involve opioids. The significance of these figures is impossible to ignore. The opioid epidemic has become a rampant public safety threat, tightening its grip on our communities. That's why the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities and the Georgia Public Safety Training Center have partnered to bring law enforcement and other first responders the critical training you need on the front line against these dangerous drugs. Whether a 911 call points to accidental opioid misuse or addiction, both can result in a potentially lethal overdose. And this is where your training can make a world of difference.
Georgia's Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities is a public safety net whose mission is to provide easy access to high-quality care, especially for individuals with mental health needs, substance use disorders, and intellectual and developmental disabilities. DBHDD's State Opioid Response Grant Team has been doing a lot of work to train and equip law enforcement to combat the opioid epidemic. However, we realized that by working together with GIPSTIC, we're able to save more lives and work more efficiently. By working together, we can pool our resources more effectively and save an even greater amount of lives. We believe that through this holistic effort, we can break through silos, pool our talent and resources into a coordinated response to address this opioid crisis.
The Georgia Public Safety Training Center is Georgia's premier training academy for all public safety professionals. We service law enforcement, firefighters, dispatchers, coroners, National Guard members to perform their duties during civil unrest and natural disasters. We also offer over 400 different classes and a variety of offerings, in-person lecture classes, online learning, blended learning, and practical exercises. Another thing the training center does is we partner internationally and nationally to come up with best practices for public safety professionals. And by partnering with these international and national partners, we develop training that is the best practice that can be used in times of stress, civil unrest, and use of force cases. We believe that the opioid crisis that we're experiencing in the state of Georgia is one of those high-level liability areas for public safety. Our law enforcement officers in the state of Georgia are dealing with opioid crisis on a daily manner. They also deal with legal opioids and illegal opioids. These illegal narcotics are coming in from all over the world. The calls are continuing to grow as the opioid addiction continues to grow in the state.
The financial aspect of the opioid epidemic was quantified in 2015 when we realized that it was costing $78.5 billion to take care of this epidemic. That is the amount of money that it cost for property damage when someone is high and they cannot pay for the property damage, for the unpaid medical cost of individuals who have overdoses and are uninsured. It's also the cost associated of having to remove someone from the home, remove a child from the home because of the parent's overdose, and the amount of money for lost productivity that is costing this country because individuals cannot go to work because of their use of opioids. $78.5 billion. Opioids include prescription medications that are used to treat pain and illicit drugs like heroin. nearly half of young people who inject heroin began using prescription medication. Opioids impact many systems of the body, like altering your mood, constipation, and slowing down your breathing. Opioid receptor binding causes both the signs and symptoms of overdose, as well as the euphoric effects or being high. That fine line between euphoric effects and overdose is often easily and unintentionally crossed.
The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, is a federal agency within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The mission of SAMHSA is to reduce the impact of mental illness and substance misuse on America's communities. Opioids carry similarly high risks of dependency, addiction, and overdose. It's not uncommon for someone that uses opioids to develop a tolerance. Tolerance happens when the individual takes the opioids for a long period of time and their body becomes physically dependent upon the drug. And over time, they need more and more of the medication to experience the same effects, whether that's pain reduction or pleasure. A loss of tolerance occurs when an individual who's been taking opioids for a long period of time stops taking the medication. When someone loses tolerance and takes opioids again, they're at higher risk for serious adverse effects, including overdose. I think when a first responder encounters an individual who has overdosed, whether accidental or intentional, everybody's situation is different, and opioids don't discriminate. So anybody can be impacted, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, a teacher, a firefighter. Anybody can accidentally overdose. At that particular moment in time, the first responder's responsibility is just to do the reversal and saving a life.
These drugs are dangerous enough without the added threat of fentanyl, the silent killer. Fentanyl is the latest opioid that is responsible for the largest number of opioid overdose deaths. Fentanyl is a Schedule II prescription drug that is used for severe pain, like trauma, like a gunshot wound or a severe injury, or to treat someone's pain after surgery. Fentanyl can be mixed unknowingly into other drugs, like heroin, cocaine, pills, which can be extremely dangerous. Fentanyl is 100 times more powerful than morphine. Just 2 to 3 milligrams can kill someone unless someone is there to stop it.
Law enforcement is usually the first to arrive at an opioid emergency. Assessing the scene for signs of overdose and administering the proper intervention can effectively reverse what could have been a deadly outcome.
To successfully respond to an opioid overdose, first responders should use the 5 steps, one of which includes administering naloxone. Naloxone is a medication that's called an opioid antagonist, and the medication is specifically used to reverse opioid overdoses. When a person uses opioids, the opioids attach themselves to receptors in the brain. Unfortunately, these receptors also affect breathing. During an opioid overdose, too many opioids attach themselves to the receptors, which can slow or stop breathing. Naloxone works by blocking opioids from the receptors, quickly reversing the overdose. The good thing about naloxone is that it has no known side effects and will not cause harm even if an individual has not used opioids.
Georgia law enforcement officers have been sworn to serve and protect the communities in which they serve. That protection begins with having the proper personal protective equipment when dealing with opioid crisis. Protection also extends to you being familiar with how to clean and dispose of your personal protective equipment. Also knowing the situation and time to call hazmat in and proper disposal of these opioids and other hazardous substances. There's items that cannot be placed in the evidence locker. They need to be disposed of properly and in a safe manner. At the end of the day, we want to make sure you as an officer is safe and the citizens you serve are safe.
The techniques and resources presented in this series are designed to promote and introduce the complete law enforcement training available through the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. Our training begins with Georgia's SOAR, the State Opioid Adapted Response for Law Enforcement, where you'll learn the 5 steps for opioid overdose. We'll also share practicum opportunities for further education on opioid overdose situations, including officer safety tips for responding to opioid crisis and proper administration of naloxone using mannequins. We'll discuss opportunities for community partnership, awareness, and outreach. To take the complete opioid response law enforcement training, visit gypstick.org and click View Courses, or call the CIT section to schedule a class near you. We can never predict when officers will be called to the scene of an opioid overdose, only that you will be. Your careful, confident response can help keep opioid mortality in Georgia to a minimum. You can save lives.
210-211, respond to cardiac arrest, possible overdose, 5315 Ivy Road, EMS is notified now.
210 and clear on call.
Oh my God!
What did he take? What did he take?
We were just having fun.
Give me your phone. Now!
Law enforcement is called to the scene of a house party, where a bystander confirms a drug overdose with help from her police dispatcher. Classic opioid overdose signs include a limp body, blue lips, nails, or skin, irregular or absent breathing, a slow, erratic pulse, pale skin, choking, gurgling, or snoring, and dilated pupils, signs that are universal regardless of skin color. The person can be awake but unable to respond, or unconscious. What began as recreational drug use has escalated out of control. Suddenly, the party's over. As a safety standard for officers facing dangerous situations in the line of duty, law enforcement officers should always respond to overdose emergencies with the proper backup and appropriate PPE. Thankfully, this person made the right call: 911. She has performed the first two steps for opioid overdose prevention: check for signs of overdose and dial 911. In Georgia, the 911 medical amnesty law, also known as the Good Samaritan law in other states, generally provides immunity for a limited quantity of controlled substances. A person who is observing or experiencing an opioid-related overdose can call 911 to seek medical attention without fear of facing criminal charges. Please check your state's Good Samaritan law, as the scope of protections covered by this immunity provision varies by state.
Where is he? Oh, this way.
Before entering the home, officers should don full personal protective equipment, PPE, latex gloves, and masks. Officer safety is always a priority. Upon entering, officers act in concert to de-escalate the situation. Officer 1 assesses the environment, locates the victim, and identifies heroin as the offending drug. One officer should be close enough to monitor the situation without entering the contaminated area. He radios for an ambulance.
Hey, what's his name? Joey. Joey? All right, do me a favor, step out for me. Thank you. Hey, Joey, can you hear me, buddy? Stay with me. Joey, can you hear me?
Although this officer isn't tending to the victim directly, this scene is contaminated. Without PPE, she's been exposed to heroin laced with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that is comparable to morphine but up to 100 times more potent. Her condition could deteriorate from ill to unresponsive in a matter of moments due to rapid respiratory depression. Officer 1 intervenes immediately. He radios for additional help while promptly administering naloxone to the exposed officer.
Dispatch, I have an officer exposed to fentanyl. Please send additional ambulance and back up to 5315 Ivory Road.
This officer must move quickly to continue the 5 steps for opioid overdose prevention. In Step 3, administer intranasal naloxone. Also known by brand names Narcan and Evzio, naloxone is an opioid antagonist administered to rapidly reverse opioid overdose by binding to opioid receptors in the brain. After administering naloxone, proceed to Step 4 and support the person's breathing by administering oxygen or performing rescue breathing. And in Step 5, closely monitor the person's response.
He's still not responding.
If no response is detected within 2 to 3 minutes after the first dose of naloxone, use a second dose. Once breathing normalizes, place the person in the recovery position on their side and continue monitoring. Stay close to provide warmth until EMS arrives. Notice, this officer did not slap or forcefully stimulate the victim. These tactics only cause further injury. If you cannot initially wake the person by shouting, rubbing your knuckles on the sternum, or lightly pinching, the person may be unconscious. You never want to put an overdose victim into a cold bath or shower. This increases the risk of falling, drowning, or going into shock. Don't inject the person with any substance other than naloxone, the only safe and appropriate treatment. If the overdose substance is unknown, administering naloxone will have no adverse effects on the victim. And finally, don't attempt to make the person vomit drugs they have swallowed. Choking or inhaling vomit into the lungs can be fatal. When handing off an overdosed individual to EMS for medical intervention and transport, brief them on the overdose timeline and all actions taken by law enforcement.
Okay, what are we dealing with?
Hey, yeah, this is Joey, 30-year-old male. He overdosed on fentanyl-laced heroin. I gave him 2 doses of naloxone. Got his breathing rate up again right now. He's alert, conscious, breathing.
Once hazardous substances are cleared, it is safe to remove and dispose of PPE. With the overdose victim safely in the hands of EMS, law enforcement still has work to do. Officers should proceed to fully secure and process the scene. This includes confiscating illegal substances, completing documentation, and making any necessary arrests for illegal activity, as per your agency's policies and procedures.
So what happens next? Am I going to be arrested? We only called to help him.
Whose heroin was it?
It was Joey's. He took it first. It just happened so fast.
Okay. Do you know if there's any more drugs here?
No, nobody else took any.
Okay.
Remember, Georgia's 911 medical amnesty law protects only the caller or callers and overdose victim with immunity when the quantity of drugs falls below a certain amount. Illegal activity beyond that protected unit must be dealt with in accordance with state laws and agency policies and procedures.
So I think you guys are good. You can go with them. If we need anything else, we'll give you a call, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
As you've just seen, law enforcement officers who arrive first at an opioid emergency are in a critical position. Responding immediately with the 5 steps for opioid overdose prevention can rescue an individual from the brink of death. Check for signs of opioid overdose. Call 911 for help. Administer naloxone. Support the person's breathing, and closely monitor the person's response. Always make officer safety a priority. Request backup. Wear PPE. Administer naloxone to exposed individuals, and call for EMS support while you monitor the victim's breathing. Remember to always properly store or dispose of contaminated PPE. You are a lifeline for victims in the debilitating thrall of opioids. Today, trained law enforcement officers saved this man's life. You might be wondering, what do survivors of opioid overdose think of these heroic efforts? How does their story end? That is next.
My name is Justin Jackson. I'm a multiple heroin overdose survivor, and first responders administering Narcan saved my life. With my overdose, I really wasn't planning to die. That was not the goal. My goal was purely to get high, but I don't ever know exactly how much I was needing or what was in it or if there's fentanyl involved. We really don't know that stuff, so we run that risk every single time. And first responders luckily got there in time, so I'm still here today. The stigma about addicts is generally that's that homeless person outside of a liquor store, that guy under the bridge that can't do anything with his life, but that's really not the case. It's your doctors, your lawyers, your neighbors, your kids. There's no rhyme or reason addiction. I promise you it does not discriminate based on any kind of socioeconomic class or race or age. It's an equal opportunity destroyer, I promise you. It is a very slippery slope from the minute I first used all the way to the point that I'm a full-blown addict and I can't stop anymore. The thing about it is it's not a moral failing, it's that I can't stop. It's like if I didn't have food in a desert or water in a desert, I cannot convince myself that I'm not going to die by not using. On the morning of my overdose, I actually was just in a driveway. I had a friend's house. I just pulled up and was just gonna get high and called him and said, hey, I'm out here, don't freak out, and decided to mix up a shot. I got high. And next thing I knew, I woke up to an EMT at my door and a policeman behind them and just all these people all around, and they asked me who the president was. I honestly didn't know. Everyone was there supporting me. There was absolutely a million reasons in my car that they could have arrested me, but they didn't. It was all about getting me treatment, getting me help, making sure I stayed alive. I've never actually seen an officer as a friend up until that point.
You have made the noble pledge to protect our communities. A comprehensive response to the opioid crisis doesn't end with a life saved. It ends with hope for a life well lived. Law enforcement's response to overdoses continues beyond the scene of an overdose. Officers must work alongside community partners to set the wheels of recovery in motion.
It's important to remember that even after a near-death experience, opioid overdose survivors are still chemically dependent on the opioid. These victims rarely bounce back on their own. They frequently need help from family members, support groups, community organizations, and health centers to help guide them through this process. Most people struggling with this addiction are not hardened criminals. They are our friends, our family, our grandparents, our teachers, and they need our help. The road to recovery is hard, but with the combined efforts of law enforcement and our community partners, it doesn't have to be lonely.
Police officers work hand in hand with other partners in the community, helping to fight the opioid epidemic. We work every day hand in hand with firefighters who respond to the scene along with EMTs. We work with the emergency room physicians, nurses who receive the patients at the hospital after an overdose. We also work with clinicians and mental health specialists and addiction specialists in recovery centers. Once the person is in recovery, there's then 12-step programs that are available out in the communities that a person can join and partner with to help keep them on the track to sobriety.
Officers who follow up with someone who has overdosed serve as a bridge to valuable resources for accessing care, treating addiction, and staying in recovery.
Here in Georgia, we have the 911 amnesty law, which allows people who might be with a victim that is overdosing to be able to call 911 freely without the fear of repercussion or arrest. And they're able to call and actually get medical help for the victim. We can't arrest our way out of this epidemic. We're here to help, not arrest. ASSIST stands for Active Substance Support Intervention Solutions Team. The ASSIST team here at Marietta Police Department uses police officers to respond to victims of overdose here in the community. Typically, we try and respond immediately to the scene when we hear an overdose has occurred, or at least within 24 hours of the overdose. We make contact with the person, we provide them resources and information on how to get into recovery, even as far as offering them a ride there. Doing anything that we can to encourage getting them into some sort of recovery center so that they can detox and get sober.
I've been in recovery since January 15th, 2016, and I truly feel like first responders gave me the second chance at life to where I can actually pay it forward and give back to my own community. Professionally, I work as the program coordinator here at the Zone in Cobb County. That is a recovery support organization that allows people that are in long-term recovery or coming out of treatment or any stage that they're in to find the support they need and make the connections that they need to stay in recovery. In the community, I collaborate with the local law enforcement, the fire departments, and also any other first responders and try to get people as quickly as possible the support and resources they need to keep them in recovery. I've even had the opportunity to meet with the Surgeon General of the United States to discuss the heroin epidemic in my local community. So my recovery journey has given me the opportunity to support people all the way from the walking in the doors at the Zone to advocating on a national level, and all because of one single person taking a chance on me and reviving me.
This is Officer Outreach at Work. Through the complete state opioid adapted response training, you will have access to specific substance abuse prevention guidance from organizations throughout Georgia. Begin with Gypstick's Pocket Guide, a quick access guide for law enforcement. Helpful resources featured in the Pocket Guide include DBHDD's substance use resources, 12-step recovery program referrals, and the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse Cares Academy, where Academy participants become certified addiction recovery empowerment specialists.
In addition to working hand in hand with our community partners, we also do outreach within the communities to educate on the opioid epidemic and the dangers that come with that. We work closely with our schools and educating our youth. We work with our churches, faith-based organizations, Rotary clubs, scouting troops, anywhere that we can get the message out within the community on the dangers of the opioid epidemic. There are two safety precautions that we talk about with the community. Number one is a medicine lockbox for the home so that medications can be locked safely and stored properly without the risk of falling into the hands of a child or someone who may overdose. Also, within the community, there are drop boxes for medication so that they can be disposed of properly and anonymously. And those can be found at your local sheriff's office, police departments, or fire stations.
The opioid epidemic is a menace to public safety and overdose victims alike. But law enforcement's coordinated community effort toward prevention mounts a good defense. Master the training, use the 5 steps for opioid overdose prevention, and reconnect with resources to show those struggling that they can count on their sworn protectors for another chance at life.
If you're trying to help us, then please come at it from a standpoint of support. Make sure that you're understanding the terminology, not using words like addict or alcoholic. Instead, person with substance use disorder, person in long-term recovery, things like that, because it's showing that you're willing to learn something different to try and support us into recovery. We understand that if we have large amounts of substances, there's not much y'all can do, but when you have someone that you know is purely a user, being able to get them the resources they need or get them to a detox instead of locking them up, that is a huge, huge part of my story. My work with opioid use disorders never stops. I answer calls and texts and Facebook messages at all hours of the night because I choose to do this professionally and also personally being a person in long-term recovery. And it allows me to have my kids back. If I didn't meet my oldest daughter until she was 5 years old, it became a complete difference from day one with my daughter, where she was terrified of me coming into a room, to now where she freaks out when she leaves. Now I'm able to be in her life. I don't have to go away. I don't have to go behind bars. I don't have to make explanations for these long absences in her life, and I don't have to die. What you guys are doing out there is absolutely amazing, and we see it. It doesn't go unnoticed, and it makes it a lot easier for those of us in long-term recovery to convince the next person when you guys are creating a good example, and thank you very much for doing that.